Good morning, everybody. Apologies for the technical problems we've been having today, but we're getting them sorted out, and hopefully we've got them sorted out for everybody. We apologize. Thank you for your patience. Good morning. Good afternoon to those of you who are joining us live from Tokyo and other places around the world. We very much appreciate your attendance with us today for what promises to be a fascinating conversation on some issues on the minds of many people today. What a pleasure to welcome all of you back here to the Council of the Americas for our latest cornerstone event highlighting international cooperation and support for economic recovery and democracy in Latin America and the Caribbean. My name is Eric Farnsworth. I'll be your host and moderator for today, and I want to thank Marvin Wiley and Guillermo Subiago, Jorge Marino, the entire staff here at the Council of the Americas for your work to coordinate these efforts today. Council of the Americas strongly supports the concept of a free and open international order, which the government of Japan has developed and promoted, and we believe that Latin America and the Caribbean must also be important contributors to this global scenario. Latin America and the Caribbean have a vital role to play, in fact, in upholding international norms and standards that allow everyone to flourish. And yet we see that the region is fully focused at this point, and understandably so, on economic recovery coming out of the pandemic, as well as on democratic challenges across much of the region. Popular dissatisfaction with lackluster economic growth, tepid recovery, growing inequality, and uncertain future prospects is weighing on democracies across the Americas. Establishing a credible path for economic recovery and growth is urgent. Meantime, China has stepped into the breach, seeking to leverage financial and economic engagement for financial gain, even at the expense, it must be said, of fundamental values of freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. To support a free and open international order, governments, including the United States, Japan, and others, we believe, must seek to strengthen democracy across the region. These conversations are particularly relevant in the run-up to the Los Angeles Summit of the Americas, where leaders will have an opportunity to highlight and promote an active, engaged, meaningful trade and economic agenda for the Americas as a key pillar supporting regional democratic governance. As of today, however, it's unclear whether such an agenda will be forthcoming, despite wide agreement that increasing trade and growth and growing investment is of critical importance to economic well-being and healthy democratic societies. And so we want to discuss these issues today to shine a light on the mutually supportive nature of trade and investment to healthy democracy across the region, and to discuss mechanisms for cooperation between Japan, the United States, regional democracies, and others in an effort to promote the free and open international order that we seek. We've got a terrific program today to discuss these issues, featuring keynote remarks by Ambassador Maki Kobayashi, who since September has been the Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan and Director General for Latin America and the Caribbean. Director General Kobayashi has a truly distinguished career in the Japanese Foreign Ministry. Prior to her current role, she was the Executive Director for Communications and Engagement for the Tokyo Olympic and Paralympic Games Organizing Committee. She has directed the European Policy Division of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She's headed the Mexico, Central America, and Caribbean section, and she's been posted to Japanese missions in France and Malaysia, among others. She began her career working on OECD and trade issues, where she also has a great deal of expertise. And so we look forward very much to her comments, after which we'll have an expert panel to discuss these issues in greater depth. Madam Director General, we're so pleased that you're able to join us today from Tokyo. Your leadership is crucial to helping us understand these issues with greater clarity and insight, and we're very interested to hear your views. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me virtually in welcoming to the Council of the Americas the Director General of the Japanese Foreign Ministry, Ambassador Maki Kobayashi. Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Vice President Farnsworth, for overviewing policy, and thank you very much for your kind introduction. Thank you and all the staff of Council of Americas to organize this session. As introduced in the beginning, today's theme is very timely when we are facing severe challenges and threats. The current crisis in Ukraine, the Russian aggression to Ukraine, confirmed us the importance of Caesar's efforts to fight for maintaining rules-based international order. We are now at the very critical moment whether we can maintain and accumulate our efforts for prosperity and peace, which were supported by values most countries have been sharing, rule of law, freedom, and democracy, or whether we allow a regime ignoring all the rights and duties of international law recognized and agreed by international community. The great majority of Latin American countries condemned the brutal breach of international law and supported the resolution at the UN General Assembly. With a history of winning freedom through independence war, the history of transition from military rule to democracy, people in Latin American countries know by their experiences the preciousness of freedom, democracy, and the right of self-determination. We believe Latin American countries, Caribbean countries, US and Japan can work together with other countries, despite the impacts it may cause due to economic relations and interests, in order to prevent the world from being ruled by violence and disinformation. Japan has also lots of economic and political stakes with Russia, but irrespective of those interests, it decided to introduce most severe sanctions. The international community must continue to show solidarity to protect dignity and freedom of humanity, and we expect to work closely with Latin American countries. During the past years, we are facing increasing challenges due to three threats: threat posed by climate change, threat posed by pandemic, and threat posed by some authoritarian regimes unilaterally changing status quo. Our basic policy to Latin American countries has three pillars. We call it three juntos. Together we prosper, together we lead the world to be a better place, and together we inspire people and next generation. Facing the current challenges, we also work with juntos principles. First, on climate change, Japan aims to realize carbon neutral by 2050. Amazon, lungs of the planet. Its forest preservation is a key to solve the climate change issue. Japan assists efforts by Brazilian government to improve control of illegal deforestation through satellite image data and remote sensing technologies. I understand the US is also helping their efforts, and this is one of the areas we can work together. Japan and the US can cooperate. We also established joint credit mechanism with Mexico, Costa Rica, and Chile. We assist projects of solar power or geothermal power generation. Green transformation can create a business chance. It can also be a business risk. No companies can be apathetic. It is an important management issue. Japanese companies are now seriously looking into the process of production, utilization, and storage and capture of carbon dioxide. We have been holding hydrogen energy ministerial meetings where some Latin American countries participate. We currently import hydrogen from neighboring countries like Australia, but Latin American countries have an abundant renewable energy and thus have a great potential for gray, blue, and green hydrogen energy. Although establishing supply chain and minimizing the costs are necessary, it is a promising area to be explored. We will, of course, continue our emergency aid and recovery assistance from hurricanes assaulting the region more frequently and more seriously in recent years, or from droughts and floodings. As for the pandemic, Latin American countries was most hit by COVID-19. Although the region occupies only 8% of world population, according to Pan American Health Organization, it had 49% of world infected and 23% of world deaths from the pandemic. This could be also partly because the Latin American and Caribbean countries has a good statistics, but still it shows the seriousness of the impact, and thus economy was also severely hit as explained earlier. Japan provided medical equipment, cold chain management, and capacity building for vaccination, bilaterally or through international organization. It also contributed to COVAX to ameliorate access to the vaccines. It provided very concessional emergency loans as well. Although in 2021, we see recoveries, supply constraint causing inflation pressure, unemployment still high, and as said previously by Vice President Fazras, the Ukrainian crisis causing even more difficult situations to our economy. We intend to continue our support. COVID-19 spread the world very quickly and required world response. All the countries needed to work to contain it. The international community was tested for its perseverance, resilience, and solidarity. It also reminded us that we are more and more interdependent and the necessity of diversification of supply chain. It also reminded us importance of face-to-face communications. At the same time, the pandemic proceeded digital society quite quickly. All the people get more accustomed to comfortable communication, close to the real communications, thanks to the technology. More meetings and negotiations are done online, like today. The reach gets wider, the working style, lifestyle changed, remote medical care gets more popular. Digital usage will continue to develop with high speed and transform our society. Personal data gets more valuable. Digital connects more directly to individuals, so protection gets more important. In terms of security of individuals, of nation, open and secure communication technology and infrastructure are vital for our future. In terms of security, open root access network ensured such conditions. Japanese companies, together with European and US companies and some Latin American companies, are joining the efforts and provide necessary technology. So we would like to contribute to and cooperate with Latin American countries in their 5G network and beyond. As for the rules-based international order, I have already touched upon it, and important theme for today. We have already observed attempts to change the status quo by force, economic coercion, and increasing hybrid threats since several years. In 2014, Russia deployed military troops to Crimea and subsequently annexed it. Since the same year, 2014, China has pressed ahead with rapid and large-scale land reclamation works in 7 features in the Spratly Islands. And it militarizes the features further, continuously developing various infrastructure and deploying military assets. Very beginning of this year, some European colleague that I used to work mentioned what is happening in Asia is what is happening in Ukraine. The reverse is exactly what we used to say in 2015 and 2017 when I was working for the Economic Policy Division. But all these matters are not regional, specific regional matters, but it's concerning for whole international society. And Latin American countries cannot be out of all this influence. Japan has been advocating for free and open Indo-Pacific. The Indo-Pacific region is facing various challenges, such as piracy, terrorism, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, natural disasters, and attempts to change the status quo. Cooperation for free and open Indo-Pacific, we call it with abbreviation FOIP, is to promote peace, stability, and prosperity across the region through ensuring rules-based international order. The idea aims promotion of rule of law, freedom of navigation, free trade, pursuit of economic projects to improve connectivity, and strengthen economic partnership, including FTA, EPA investment treaties. Commitment for peace and stability through capacity building, for maritime law enforcement, humanitarian assistance, disaster response. So free and open Indo-Pacific is also very relevant to Latin American and Caribbean countries, not only with those countries facing Pacific, but also those at Atlantic side, for they also have more and more economic relations with Asia Pacific. When the Minister Motegi visited 8 countries, Mexico, Uruguay, Paraguay, Brazil, Guatemala, Panama, and Jamaica last year, he not only discussed on bilateral relations, but also regional situations and confirmed to strengthen coordination for maintenance of free and open international order based on same values we share. Minister Hayashi, since taking office last November, have already discussed so far with his counterparts from Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Chile, and we would like to continue our discussions at very high level as well. Before closing my remarks, let me touch upon quickly on reinforcement of business environment and economic framework. We often discuss with relevant authorities about amelioration of business environment together with our private sector, for tax system or investment related regulations are too complicated or some procedures taking too much time. In this regard, we are very glad to note that OECD accession process will be open for Brazil, Peru, and Argentina. The various reviews on policies of many different sectors in the process will help advance the situations to be more business friendly. This is my conviction through my previous experiences at the OECD delegation. And we are very encouraged by some countries' strong commitment and enthusiasm to use this process, and we intend to support the process. Increasing FTA networks is also very helpful for business. Japanese industries having presence in Mexico quadrupled after Japan-Mexico EPA entered into force. NAFTA, now USMCA, Mercosur, Central American Common Market, and CAFTA-DR FTAs within the region, as well as FTAs with other regions, improve great and provide great opportunities. CPTPP is for Japan another gateway to Latin American countries, which is more ambitious compared with our bilateral EPAs with several Latin American countries. We sincerely hope that new Chilean government will soon ratify the agreement. We are also very much looking forward to the outcomes of the Summit of Americas, which is more, and also the initiative or call to action. Further commitment of the US to the region will surely increase the resilience of the region and promote trade and investment. We have many projects jointly financed with Inter-American Development Bank. We put importance on increasing connectivity with Latin American countries, strengthening infrastructure, digital transformation, green transformation, improving growth, addressing disparities, disaster prevention, and capacity building. We would very much like to closely coordinate for bringing peace, stability, growth, maintenance of rules-based order, and for the defense of values we all cherish and share. Thank you for kind attention. Thank you very much.
Madam Ambassador, that was fabulous. Thank you. Thank you for your words, for your leadership, sincerely, on these issues, and for your longtime commitment to the Latin American and Caribbean region. It really makes a difference, and we appreciate it very, very much. But to you and your entire team, we look forward to working with you going forward as well. You've laid out a very important and comprehensive agenda, and I think it makes a lot of sense to work together toward these goals that you have laid out. So we understand your time is very tight today, so we thank you for joining us and really appreciate your cooperation and, again, leadership on these issues. Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now a terrific panel to follow up these comments. Boy, that was really an impressive set of remarks that the ambassador made, and our panelists are up to the challenge of following her, but it's a big challenge. I'm not going to introduce them in depth because their bios are all on our website, www.as-coa.org, but I will introduce them by name and their affiliation. They're all well known to many of us active in the trade and democracy space. Our panel consists of John Hamilton, who's a partner with White & Case LLP. He'll be our first respondent. Alberto Bernal, who is the Chief Emerging Markets and Global Strategist with XP Investments. Our third panelist is Antonio Ortiz Mena, who is the Senior Vice President of the Albright Stonebridge Group here in Washington. And our fourth panelist is Naotaka Yamaguchi, who is the Chief Representative in Guatemala of the Japan International Cooperation Agency. So we are blessed to have each one of them and their expertise to share with us. John Hamilton, the ambassador laid out a comprehensive agenda. She really gave us a lot to think about. And from your perspective, you've done a lot of important work on the intersection between trade and economic engagement and democracy. And as the ambassador was talking about free and open international order, she also made a strong plea, I understood, for Latin America and the Caribbean to be active players in the global environment. And I wonder from your perspective, first of all, what your response to her comments might be. And then second, what are some of the specific things you would see for Japan, US, Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean to work together toward to help achieve this rules-based international order that the ambassador spoke about? It, ladies and gentlemen, John Hamilton.
Thanks very much, Eric, and thank you to all our friends and colleagues with the Council of the Americas. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and fantastic to hear the remarks from Japan this morning. I'm going to try to set the stage, Eric, in response to your question by going back to basics, going back to first principles. I think that when we're looking at issues of democracy and free markets, and what they mean for the Americas and relationship with Japan and Asia, we need to remember that right now we're trying to escape a global pandemic, and we're facing the most significant geopolitical risk of disruption to the planet since the end of the Cold War, maybe since the end of World War II. This is not the time to mince words. We need to stand up for core values that have promoted the spread of freedom for voters and freedom of markets in most parts of the world in recent decades. You know, Churchill said, no one pretends that democracy is perfect. Indeed, it is the worst form of government except everything else that's ever been tried. And you could say the same for capitalism as well. So if we go back to first principles, we need to remember, number one, the consensus around free election and free markets at the end of the Cold War was right. And the corresponding upsides of globalization, democracy, and free trade have lifted countless millions of people in Latin America and emerging markets and in the former Soviet bloc out of poverty and into a more rules-based system of running the world. Second, unfortunately, perhaps inevitably, given the nature of human condition, complacency set in. We needed to do more, and we still need to do more to address issues such as inequality, environmental, social impact, anti-corruption, and governance issues. Third, in that complacency, you really have the sense that we lost our way, certainly in Washington, and that's not a partisan comment. If we go back to 2015, the US was negotiating the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and there's no better example of the challenges that we now face than the fate of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The US was also negotiating a transatlantic treaty at the time. Neither came to fruition, and that really hits hard because the Trans-Pacific Partnership was an opportunity to build this bridge of a rules-based order across different countries in the Pacific, and effectively to realize the long-sought dream dating back to the 1994 Summit of the Americas, Eric, that you have on the wall behind you, which was to begin to really build a multilateral free trade agreement of the Americas. And so this is the historical moment we find ourselves in at the time of this horrible epic drama unfolding in Ukraine, which has risk factors for Japan and Asia and all of the Americas, most certainly. So let's go to brass tacks. First of all, it is a true shame for the United States and Japan and Latin America that the U.S. did not follow through in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Any new ways that the United States government can find to cooperate with our friends in Japan and other friends across the Americas to re-engage on multilateral opportunities to advance free trade in a way that takes into account all of the concerns I mentioned, which I'll roughly call ESG type concerns, is critical. Going into the Summit of the Americas this year, we should not be afraid to address these issues, and we have to find a way to find a bipartisan center that is willing to embrace these issues. In fact, I think it's shameful if we don't, as we watch the way that the global rules-based system is effectively under assault right now in Ukraine. Second, let's not be shy about the great power of free markets to change countries. My firm, White & Case, is a 120-year-old US-based law firm, but we've had offices in Tokyo for decades, in Mexico for 30 years, in Brazil for 25 years. We make a great emphasis on participation, for example, of our Mexico City partners in Tokyo for an annual conference with Japanese business focused on cross-border investment. So I think that we need to remind ourselves that everything that's been happening over the past quarter of a century, that's one small example. There are multitudes of examples like that. We cannot take for granted. We have to reinvigorate those kind of efforts in the aftermath or the fading chapter of the pandemic that we find ourselves in, because we've seen how quickly integration into the global economy can be destroyed, either through what's happened in Ukraine or what's happening with sanctions with Russia. And finally, I think that we need to focus in our relations across Latin America. How do you balance the continued growth of free markets and competition with the kinds of concerns that I highlighted and how they are manifested in elections? And so we have seen in some markets around the region where diverse types of political leaders have come into office, yet they have managed to maintain a core focus on issues of democracy and maintaining not only fiscal responsibility from an institutional perspective and how a state is managed, but also the basic rules of respecting contracts and facilitating long-term investment, because it's those kind of long-term investments that develop infrastructure, develop the major natural resources sectors of a country, and facilitate the kind of rules-based relationships from Japan to Latin America to the US that are so critical to all of those countries, but frankly to the direction that our world is heading in. Thank you.
John, terrific comments, and you really got us going in a very effective way, and you linked some very complicated themes together impressively. You'd think you were a partner in a law firm or something. I don't know. It's good stuff. You've also got a much better background than I do, but I appreciate your shout out to the Summit of the Americas poster from 1994. That's original, actually, from Miami. But we could go off on that, but thanks for your outstanding comments. Let's go to Alberto Bernal. Alberto, John left his comments on the investment side. You are in the investment sector, and long-term contracts, attractiveness of investment climates, these are the things that are your bread and butter. The ambassador laid out some areas for potential cooperation, whether it be clean energy or technology, 5G, she mentioned these sorts of things. But if you talk to private investors, sometimes the region isn't that attractive from the perspective of investment climate issues. Can you help us think through from a strategic perspective, what some of the countries in the region might be able to do to attract these investments that we're talking about, whether it's from Japan, US, Europe, or internal, right? Brazilian investments in Brazil, Argentine investments in Argentina, Mexico, et cetera. So over to you for your comments, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Eric. Well, thank you for inviting me. Thank you to the Council of the Americas for the invitation as well. You know, Eric, I was just remembering before I came joined the webinar, and you probably remember that as well. It's let's go back. It's 2002. It's August 2002. The market is talking about the imminent win by former President Lula. At that time, he was candidate Lula. The market is talking about an imminent default and financial crisis in Brazil. And then one very smart guy, Mohamed El Erian, at that time he was the head of PIMCO EM, the fund. He was investing there. He took a plane. He went down to Sao Paulo, sat down with at that time candidate Lula, and he came back to Newport Beach, and he bought a bunch of Brazilian bonds. And I think 6 months after, he was in an interview with Bloomberg or CNBC, I don't quite remember. And they asked him, why did you make that bet? And then he said, well, I sat down with this guy for 45 minutes, and I came out with the conviction that he was not going to default. So, and at that point in time, the Brazilian real was at 370 before the election. 4 years after, the real is at 160. And Brazil saw one of the most impressive booming times under President Lula, and a guy that was expected to default on the debt. Why am I mentioning this, Eric? Because I find a lot of parallels in between where we are today and where we were at that time. Eric, last year when I spoke to investors all over the world about Chile, about Peru, about Brazil, about Colombia, everybody was very, very negative. They would tell me, you know what, Alberto, there's much better opportunities every other places. So why go into this very convoluted part of the world with such difficulty on the political front, et cetera, et cetera. Let's go to today, March 22nd, and we look at the performance of the market. The NASDAQ is down 10%. The Brazilian Bovespa is up 25% in dollar terms. And actually, no, in Brazilian real terms, if you put it in dollar terms, it's even higher. Why? Because the real started moving to levels that are more logical to fundamentals, at 490 right now. When we run our models here at XP Investment, where should the real be at this point in time? The answer is somewhere around 3.9 and 4.1. So there's a lot of opportunities that we're seeing in our region, despite the complicated nature of things. You know, we're getting out of a pandemic. We still have the political uncertainties, et cetera, et cetera. We have a very populist president in Peru. We're still to see what's going to happen in Chile. The Colombian elections are coming forward, and the Brazilian elections are coming forward. Yet still, the market is betting on the region. And to me, that's actually very positive. And again, it comes back to the logic of investment, which is, you know, when reporters ask Warren Buffett, they always ask him the same question. And Warren Buffett is a very humble guy. Honestly, Eric, if a reporter asked me the same question every single day, every single time, I would lose it. But Warren Buffett doesn't, and it's always the same question, Mr. Buffett. What's your secret? How is it that you're so rich? And the guy answers the same question every single time in a very humble way. So, oh, it's a great question, Mr. Reporter. And the answer is very simple. I buy when everybody sells. I sell when everybody buys. And I'm feeling the same kind of environment at this point in time. And I think it's very, very positive from the standpoint of where we may see our region in a couple of years' time. Let me finish by mentioning just two things that I think are very relevant. Energy transition. Energy transition is happening. It's going to accelerate. and it's a must from the standpoint of the survival of our species. So we need to move forward, and we need to move forward as fast as we can on this issue. But there's one component of energy transition that is a must. You cannot move from hydrocarbons to alternative energy without mining. And if you don't have the minerals to move to the new world of sustainability, you're not going to be able to get there. And it's very hard to make a case of energy transition being successful without including Peru, Chile, Argentina, Colombia, Brazil, Mexico, because we have a lot of resources in our region. And like, for example, the lithium potential in Argentina, it's unprecedented. You need to continue moving into copper. The amount of copper that you can find in Colombia is incredible. So unless we have an extremely illogical policy guidelines, extremely logical policy guidelines all over our region, we will see increased mining production in LATAM. And this increased mining production will allow for additional taxation to come into the region, and for governments to be able to generate more resources to do what we need to do, which is to feed our kids and to educate our kids and to be able to move out of this poverty the trap, let's put it this way. And the other issue that I would mention is reshoring. Reshoring is happening, and we need to take, or the region as a whole needs to understand that this is a golden opportunity. It is a given, Eric. Whatever happens in the next 10 years, the relationship in between China and the US will remain very complicated. It doesn't matter if you have Democrats in power, Republicans in power, independents in power, it doesn't matter. The relationship is unlikely to get better as we move forward. And US companies are understanding this issue, and the amount, the potential for reshoring from the standpoint of Central America, Colombia, Chile, Mexico, it's huge. Because, with automatization and with robots, et cetera, even if you have higher labor costs in some parts of LATAM, which, by the way, is no longer the case in many countries, but still, let's suppose that's the case. With increased technology, et cetera, you can still make reshoring a very viable opportunity for U.S. business interest. And we need to make sure that happens. How do we make sure that happens, for example? And I'll finish with this. In the case of Mexico, President López Obrador will be wise to listen to what companies are telling him. You need to make sure that you don't mess with the energy future of Mexico. Just don't screw it up. We have a good pathway towards the future. If you don't change the rules of the game, there will be increased clean energy in Mexico, and that's a must for companies like Siemens or GM, et cetera, to increase its production levels in Mexico under ESG guidelines. But we need to make sure that these things remain in place, because otherwise we won't see these increased levels of investment. But again, and I'll finish with this, the parallels that I'll find in between 2022 and 2002 are significant, and I think that's a very good news from the standpoint of our region.
Thanks very much indeed for that, Alberto. And in fact, if you look at my portfolio, which like probably most everybody's except yours, Alberto, I'm sure, but mine is way down for the year, with one exception. That's the Latin American fund, which is actually up in a very healthy way. So we hope that continues. And I ascribe to your comments. Well done. Thank you so much. The one thing I'd like to pursue, if we have time, come back to it. Your comments about mining is spot on. You can't get to energy transition without robust mining and all these things you've just talked about. But you do have a sense that Latin America, from the political, populist, and environmental and indigenous movements, may be moving in a different direction. And so there's a political issue there that really does have to be resolved in a positive way for everybody in Latin America, and not to say the global community, because the resources are critical for the energy transition, and you've highlighted that very, very well. Thank you for that. As we move to Antonio Ortiz Mena. Antonio, you are, before you started with Albright Stonebridge, you were a trade negotiator. We've known each other for many years, working on NAFTA, USMCA, but many other agreements as well. And, you know, as we've talked about it, as John has introduced issues like TPP, and Alberto has introduced issues like investment in clean energy, how can the trade agenda, which right now seems to be not very popular politically, certainly from a Washington perspective anyway, but perhaps from other capitals as well, how can the trade agenda be used to advance some of these very important policy goals that we're looking for, ultimately getting to the point that the ambassador was talking about in her keynote address about a free and open international order? You know, trade seems to be a tool that people don't want to use these days. What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Eric, and thank you to the Council for the invitation to this very interesting and timely panel. So, yes, let's talk trade. My first idea here, Eric, is to use what we have. And I would start with the CPTPP and then make a reference to the USMCA. So I wish the US were a part of the CPTPP. Perhaps most of the US feel the same way, but they're not there, right? At least we do have, of course, Japan, but we have Canada, we have Chile, we have Mexico, and we have Peru. And I was reviewing the preamble, and sometimes it's seen as a bromide, cut and paste, but I think we should take it seriously. It does speak about sustainable growth. It does speak about inclusive growth. So those are the big aims of the CPTPP. And then within the content, I think there is a lot of potential that is still not well used. It's still not tapped. And together with companies from Japan or the Japanese Development Agency, I think a lot could be done in Latin America. Let me give you just a few examples. Incorporating more Latin American and Caribbean SMEs into the supply chains of Japanese multinationals. I think that would really help development. We talk about it, we don't do as much as we should, so that's one specific issue. Then there's a potential to deal with minority-owned governments. There are important indigenous communities across Latin America and the Caribbean that stand to benefit from trade. The instruments are there. So I don't think it's a problem with the instruments. It's just using them in a better way. There's even a chapter at CPTPP on development. There's actually a chapter on that. And there's supposed to be a committee on development. I don't know how much it has met, how much it's been used. But again, there's just a very big potential to do that, right? The USMCA does not have a development chapter. The preamble is similar to the CPTPP, so it does talk about sustainable growth, inclusive trade, and again, it also provides a number of elements. E-commerce creates a big potential for inclusion of groups that have not benefited from trade, and I just think that it's now or never to sort of use it or lose it, right? It's not a problem with the instruments. It's the lack of adequate use, and governments and companies from Japan and from the region not fully using these agreements. I think it is time for action rather than just talk about the same things we talked during the Miami summit, right? We do it or we will have a bigger backlash against trade and investment. A couple of specific initiatives that I think could be useful. We spoke about the energy transition. So, Latin America is rich in hydro, in solar, In wind, yes, critical minerals. So that could provide two opportunities. One, on the mineral side, to generate those minerals in a sustainable way to facilitate the energy transition in those countries and other countries. But there is a backlash against mining. I've seen it in Peru, I've seen it in Colombia, I've seen it in Chile, in Argentina, and in Mexico, right? And for example, in Mexico, there has been a halt to foreign investment in mining. So there's an opportunity to invest in a different way to benefit local communities, to benefit local suppliers. So if we don't do that, the resources will be there, but they will not be tapped. Secondly, the energy transition can help manufacturing in the region by using hydro and solar and wind, gas, if necessary, to promote manufacturing. I am very concerned about the way things are going in Mexico. We can address this in the Q&A. But at least the potential is there for the energy transition in Latin America. And two last items. I also looked at the Pacific Alliance. We don't talk a lot about it these days, Eric, right? But Singapore just joined, so there's a bigger Asia Pacific connection, and it does include Colombia. That is not a part of the CPTPP. So I think we should see how the Pacific Alliance can be used to foster trade and investment in the region. Regarding sustainability, I'm pretty passionate about environmental issues, especially the oceans. I like to do scuba diving. And I saw that in 2016, the Pacific Alliance created an ad hoc group on fishing, right? And, Japan is a big consumer of ocean products. So maybe there's something to do there in terms of sustainable investment for sustainable fishing along the Pacific coast. That's just an area I'm very passionate about, and I think there's a big potential for that. And lastly, directly speaking about human rights and democracy, I believe that companies have a role to play, and they are playing a role. So it is not only governments. In Mexico's agreement with the U.S., with the European Union, there are commitments on democracy and human rights, much less so in the USMCA CPTPP. They're different animals, but I think those issues cannot be ignored. And I think it is very important for developed countries, development agencies to keep funding civil society organization, NGOs in Latin America and the Caribbean that address democracy and human rights issues. Recently, there has been a backlash in Mexico because of the USAID funding of some anti-corruption NGOs in Mexico. I think that funding is absolutely essential, and that hopefully Japan, the US, other governments will keep funding these powerful independent NGOs that work to bolster human rights and democracy. Again, it is now or never. Time to walk the walk and not talk the talk, Eric.
Yeah, Antonio, thank you. And it's a good reminder to us that we don't have unlimited time necessarily. Your point about the oceans, I think is a really interesting one, a very positive one, and an area where there's obvious cooperation that's ongoing, but much more needs to occur. And it can truly be a pan-Pacific cooperation. And we see, frankly, what China's doing in terms of fishing off the coast of Latin America, and it's not sustainable fishing. It's bringing a fleet. I think the AP had a really important expose on Chinese fishing fleets some months ago, showing that they just descend just outside territorial waters and scoop up fish and then depart, and leaves the long-term fisheries in Peru or Ecuador or other places disadvantaged. But this is a real area for cooperation. I really like your comments about the Pacific Alliance as well as the CPTPP. I think if we think creatively, we should be able to find ways to get countries like Uruguay and Ecuador into the CPTPP. Why not? The UK has requested partnership there. I believe Uruguay has. There's some interesting things going on. The United States, we might not be in the game at this point. We should be. We may not be, but that doesn't mean the rest of the region should be standing still. And I think that some countries anyway are not. Well, in that regard, Guatemala is a country of great challenges perhaps and significance going forward. And I want to bring into the conversation now Taka Yamaguchi, who is the JICA representative, Japan International Cooperation Agency representative in Guatemala City, for some comments in terms of what some specific plans and programs and cooperation is ongoing under your leadership and what you see on the ground in this very complicated part of the world. Thank you so much for joining us from Guatemala, and please, over to you for your comments.
Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you very much for your comments and my colleague panelists. First of all, I would like to share our viewpoints on Guatemala. As you say, in Guatemala, there are a set of challenges. Can I say weak governance, judicial process, poverty gap, lack of opportunity, and as you know, Guatemala is an ethnically divided, and so socioeconomically it is a fragmented society. And we can see as an international development worker, as we are, it is a very good company to cope with so many things to do. And in a nutshell, we see Guatemala is a captured state by these historically and socioeconomically, and Guatemala experienced 36 years of civil war, and it casted on still negatively. And also we see it's a country as very pessimistic. However, why we are working? Because we share democracy, and we see potential such as agriculture to improve the agricultural value chain, and it's a tourism country also, and devastated by COVID-19. And I feel future industrialization based on the human resources, but the educational issues are very, very important, and however pessimistic. And our approach, why? I always ask myself why we are working here in Central America, because politically or economically, our ties between Japan and Central America is not so strong. However, and overall, we share. For Japan, it is very important to have a peace society. As Ambassador Kobayashi said, prosperity is important for us. It's in our mission as a Japan International Cooperation Agency. So as JICA, our overall goal in Central America, and especially in Guatemala, is stability and peace and democracy and socio-economic growth. And in these years, our concerns are the same as in the United States government, such as it may be transversal issues such as an irregular migration and citizen security and human resources in the local government. So in this sense, we share the view that the USAID in Guatemala is working, such as an opportunity program or value chain program. And maybe our our advantage as a JICA is a very neutral in Central America. The people don't see our malicious intention, or it's neutral. We have a grassroots activity dispatching more than 40 volunteers. And we have a set of schemes and technical cooperation or financial cooperation, road construction, and scholarship and training programs. But we know that the JICA is a relatively small institution compared with World Bank and IDB or USAID. So we are very concerned about to share the experience of coordinate with other donors. And we would like to have a long-term vision in order to have results in one programs. We are tended to see a very microscopic views as we would like to have results only in 3 or 4 years, but to make a behavior change, we need more than 5 or maybe 10 years. So, but our practical level, our consigns that our counterpart, basically they are the central government, and political trauma is very, very difficult for us. Frequent rotation position, and the government doesn't have a long-term view, and every 4 years there is an election campaign. So our approach maybe to focus on the leaders. Can we say mayors or community leaders or NGO leaders, and to foster those leadership in long term. Still, we don't have any conclusion, and every day we are trying to improve Guatemalan economic and society. And I can highlight that recently we are preparing for a technical cooperation project on financial inclusion. That is one of the endeavors of JICA that we would like to try to improve the migrant remittances from the U.S. to Guatemala, because they cannot take advantage of a huge, more than 10% of GDP of Guatemala. They are saving annually, and however, it is not utilized well. And our challenge is how to take advantage that remittances, and we know that USAID has a practice, and so our idea is how to share the experiences and to leave results in long term. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And you've got some very important cooperative programs underway. The financial inclusion one is particularly important. I think you're exactly right. Remittances are such a driver of the economy for Central American countries, and yet the remittances themselves aren't frequently utilized in the most efficient or effective way. So very important comments. Thank you very much. Let's return to John Hamilton. There's a lot on the table, John, and we've got only about 15 minutes left to get all of the panelists another shot at some of these questions. But to you, nearshoring has come up, I think, with virtually, well, I think all of you panelists have mentioned it, and rule of law, of course. But all of the things that people like me have been talking about in terms of nearshoring, certainly during the pandemic, have not yet seemed to materialize, right? I mean, the promise that Antonio Ortiz Mena was talking about in terms of trade agreements have not been fully utilized or realized, in part because I think there's a question in investors' minds and in corporate minds in terms of rule of law and some of these issues. So how should we think about these issues? Or let me put it differently. How can we better take advantage of the opportunities that clearly present themselves in the context of nearshoring, reshoring, whatever, but bringing investment to the Western Hemisphere in a more integrated and more intentional manner? And what might it take for investors to really see that opportunity that we've been talking about?
Thank you, Eric, and thanks to all my colleagues for their interesting and useful comments. I'll hit two quick points, Eric. First of all, what we are seeing in Central America at this time is a very interesting flashpoint. Where have we come since we ratified the Central American Free Trade Agreement, which was quite a long time ago at this point, over 15 years ago? And what we see is an area of great complexity and the efforts that the Biden administration is making to try to better integrate Central America into the regional economy, significantly because of immigration concerns. But I think we need to keep in mind that all of these efforts, the power of the private market to drive development is paramount. And so as we're looking at the challenging moment with Mexico and the current administration of Mexico and the challenges in Central America, we need to keep in mind that long-term stability of contract, respect for contracts is the essential element to major investment and long-term development. So the reason I started today with the sort of back to basics comments is because sometimes I think we get ourselves twisted up in trendy discussions and weeds, and we need to keep the basics in mind. And so I think that's critical for nearshoring and what supply chains look like in the post-pandemic era and what they mean in the Americas. The second thing that I would like to mention that's related and connects to various comments I heard is energy and mining. And I thought it was a very helpful comment to link energy interdependence with the mining sector and what from Guatemala down through the Andes to Chile, all of these parts of the region have significant mining resources, but have already demonstrated over the past decade significant difficulty in getting the balance right for facilitating investment and protecting the environment at the same time. There are a decade of waves of claims against Colombia, of which I'm a part of, related to environmental issues in the mining sector. And so these are the kinds of issues that are going to be important for the long-term ability of governments in the region and foreign investment to really enhance the mining sector while balancing environmental concerns. And as Antonio mentioned, environmental issues like that are built into the final, what became the final version of the TPP. And I think this is really important for Japanese investment, Korean investment. There's a lot of Japanese and Korean investment in the region that is really important, because without those critical participation in these key industry sectors, what's happening is that China becomes the sole main investor, and that's what happened in some of the markets over the past 10 years. So I think back to basics still matters, but applied to the post-pandemic challenges of nearshoring and where some of these key industries like energy transition and mining are headed.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Chinese investment. Council of the Americas has played a leading role, I think, in showing that the equivalent dollar investment isn't quite the same in terms of yuan necessarily because of the externalities that each one represents. So we can have another session about that. In fact, we've had many of them, but thank you for raising those topics, and I think very important. Alberto, we talked about the attractiveness in the current environment of some of the opportunities in Latin America, but those who have watched the region for more than 5 minutes know that the region is cyclical, no? And so the question I would have is, how can we do better this time? How can we help ensure that these opportunities are sustainable and that they don't, at some point fall away as investor appetite goes to the next shiny object, or, Ukraine is resolved, perhaps, hopefully very soon, and people rush into Eastern Europe and neglect Latin America. I mean, how can we balance this in a way that's more sustainable? Do you have any advice for us at all?
Well, Eric, that's the question of the billion, obviously, to see how we can balance all these things. And all the panelists have touched upon the key issue, which is judicial certainty, the sanctity of contracts. And that's where we still unfortunately, we haven't been able to cross over to allow for these things now. But I'm an optimist by nature, and Eric, some things have been happening the last couple of months, which I think are relevant to mention. Let me just give you a very specific issue in terms of the Constitutional Assembly in Chile. The good news is that it seems like democracy is working in this instance, because you saw the most outlandish ideas coming from the hard left in terms of the Constitutional Assembly, like giving human rights to the soil, in that way, basically completely outlawing mining in the country. It's ridiculous, and thank God, this thing went, and the Constitutional Assembly took a look at that and said, people need to get a grip. And of course, we're all for ESG principles and the taking care of the environment, all these things, but we need to feed our kids as well. So my sense is that, for example, in the case of Chile, when this whole process ends, yes, we will have probably higher royalties, higher taxes, but it will still be a viable sector. And Chile will continue to be a very big player in the commodities business around the world. And it's the way it should be, Eric, because that's what Chile is supposed to do. Chile is supposed to help the world in energy transition by producing copper. It's as simple as that. Just like Colombia will probably be a much larger producer of gold, assuming that the hard left doesn't get its way. But again, I'm a believer in democracy. I do think that there's a lot of space in between the extreme views on the environment and the libertarian views on that, and we will get some middle of the ground issues there. And my sense is that in 10 years' time, when we look back, the region will have become a much larger participant in the mining business around the world. And again, I think that once we get through the Brazilian elections, I think that it's very likely that President Lula, the former President Lula, will win again. But he's probably going to win with Alckmin to his side. And Alckmin is a very centrist guy. So these kinds of views, I think that these kinds of politics will allow us to generate increased levels of foreign interest in the mining sector. My sense is that in the Colombia election, for example, my sense is that candidate Gustavo Petro will not win. Because in the second round, the anti-Petro vote is going to be very significant. And if that's the case, then the mining sector remains a very viable sector for Colombia's economy. My sense is that Argentina, come 2023, moves to the right again. And in 2023, with a right-wing or center-right president, and with the lithium potential that Argentina has, Argentina looks pretty good. So, and in terms of Peru, I was just in Lima last week, Eric, and I actually had a very funny conversation with an industrial with a business person there, and I asked him, so, hey, how are you guys doing with the new president? And Eric, the guy, said to me something that I found was very interesting. He said, you know what, Alberto? Great, because there's so much infighting going on. If there's an impeachment, no impeachment, who's the new minister, who's the not new minister, etc. That in between all this infighting, we're not talking about mining reform anymore. We're not talking about nationalization of pension funds anymore. We're not talking about any of those things that had us very concerned. So this infighting is actually allowing for Peru to move forward without having that much negative connotations from the policy standpoint. So let's see, hopefully remain like that.
Yeah, that's an important point. And oftentimes we get fixated on the politics and forget what's happening in the real economy, whether it's Peru or the US or somewhere else. That's a great point. It's one of the reasons, Alberto, why I love having you on, to talk with you, because you're such a straight shooter. And for those who are listening and taking notes, and I hope you are, he just gave you a way to reposition your portfolio, ladies and gentlemen. So I hope you're taking advantage of that. I know I am. But let's go to Antonio Ortiz Mena. We don't have a lot of time, but we do have two important panelists that I do want to give a second shot at. Shot at, I guess, too. But in this context, Antonio, Mexico for a long time was really a leader in the trade space. Recognizing the importance of trade, not just for economic well-being, but ultimately for the transformation of the country to a full democracy. And I think people have argued, many have argued that NAFTA was really transformative in the Mexican context, not just because of the economic side, but because it really allowed for the best democratic impulses to flourish, particularly in the election of 2000, et cetera, and moving forward. And it wasn't us saying that, it was the Mexican people saying that really in a very significant way. And so the question I would ask, and you've lived that experience, you've been a proponent for it, do you see in some way Mexico recapturing this mantle of trade promotion as a way to really promote democracy regionally? We have the USMCA. Mexico has had trade agreements with many countries around the world. Japan has a bilateral with Mexico. Somebody's mentioned the Pacific Alliance, CPTPP. I mean, you go down the line, Mexico's a real leader. Where do you see that going forward from here?
So Eric, I guess you're asking for straight shooters here, right? So let me be a straight shooter. I don't see Mexico, say, withdrawing from any agreement, right? In fact, the USMCA was negotiated during a presidential transition with the president-elect. So López Obrador is a believer in sort of the USMCA. But the big difference is that previous governments, by and large, had domestic economic policies that complemented Mexico's international trade policy and policies towards foreign investment. What we have now is a disconnect or a contradiction between open trade and, I would say, broadly anti-business policies, if not by design, although some of them are by design, and that's the case of energy, others are by default in terms of, lack of coordination between different agencies, a great deal of legal uncertainty, high levels of political risk. So my concern, Eric, is that we will have sort of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right? We will do the right things, in my view, and what's been proven to be good for economic growth. And then we would be following policies that are against what we're trying to do at the international level. So I am very concerned. Sort of my optimistic scenario is that the situation remains the same, and then a next government in late 2024 starts to see how domestic economic policy can better complement international economic policy. One area where I do see opportunities is at the sub-federal level. Mexico, like Brazil, is a large federal state, like Argentina, right? So I think it is important for investors to look at what state governments are doing vis-a-vis foreign investment, because some of them are more friendly and provide a more secure business environment than other states. So I would encourage companies from Japan and from other countries to look at the sub-federal level, right? For example, Mexico has a lot of mining resources in the central and north, where you tend to have more business-friendly governments. So for me, that's an opportunity, Eric.
Very good. Thank you for that. Very well said. You addressed a complicated issue there, I think, very effectively. So thank you for being willing to do that. Our final word will go to Mr. Yamaguchi Naotaka. We'll bring you back on screen. And, you know, you've mentioned a couple things with reference to Central America. Let's say Central America, not just Guatemala, but, you know, the United States, we are focusing on the region. We have put resources into the region. Japan has been a real partner in that effort for many, many years. I started my career on Central American issues in 1990, you know, working on these issues. And yet something just doesn't seem to be working, right? I mean, we still have some real challenges that we've all been talking about. And I wonder, from your perspective, is there one thing that you see, if you had a magic wand, that you would see that could be changed from the Guatemala context, from the Central America context, just to be able to say, look, let's work on this one issue and maybe we'll get better or different results? Do you have any insight or wisdom for us on that perspective?
Thank you, Eric. The key word I think I hit on my head is the trust. Trust, I mean, trust between JICA and the counterpart of Guatemalan government, or Honduras or El Salvador government. Can I say, but I mentioned before that Guatemala has a set of challenges, the corruption or weak governance. And people from outside tend to think that Guatemala is a very bad country. However, we don't see that, and we have several cooperation projects, technical cooperation projects. For reference, let's say our community policy project in capital area. We are working with the Ministry of Governance and National Civil Police. It's a beautiful project. It's to improve, first of all, making behavior changes of the police agent. However, we are day-to-day activities, and including not only a grassroots activity, we are involving people there, and not only police agents, but the people live in the area. And also we are talking about that our project with the high-ranking authorities, including a minister and a vice minister, and we the idea is trust, and we find that many agents and officials are really working to improve Guatemalan society. And they responded, and we could make a great advances statistically. The area of intervention, we could reduce some homicide rates, and through the evaluation study, the trust between the citizens and police agency have improved. So the key word for near future to work on in mind for ourselves is trust. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, and that I think that is a great way to end this panel discussion, and really gives us a lot to reflect on as we go forward from this particular meeting. I really want to thank our terrific panelists for their insight: John Hamilton, Alberto Bernal, Antonio Ortiz Mena, and now Taka Yamaguchi, as well as our keynote speaker who joined us live from Tokyo, Ambassador Kobayashi, the Director General for the Western Hemisphere. This conversation could go on for much longer. I think we've only scratched the surface, but mindful of all of your time, we are going to call this to a close with our thanks from the Council of the Americas for your insights, your wisdom, your guidance, your advice, and in all cases, your friendship. So we thank you for that. We ask our audience members to come back next time as well, and we hope to see you very soon for the next opportunity to engage here with us at the Council of the Americas. With that, we will call our program to a close. This is Eric Farnsworth in Washington. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next time.